They told him the pact would protect him, that it had sustained the town for generations, and that all he had to do was feed it. But Breckenridge doesn't just demand loyalty. It harvests bloodlines, it reshapes identities, and when the ritual is interrupted, it doesn't forget. In this volume, the boundaries between life and death collapse. Whispers turn into voices, and what the townspeople tried to bury claws its way to the surface. Breckenridge draws people in. That much has always been true. A perfect picture of mountain charm, air that feels cleaner, trees older than history textbooks allow, winding streets that promise cozy inns and quiet snowfalls. But there's another truth, one that visitors are never told. Breckenridge does not let you leave if you've seen too much. Meet Cal Morgan, age 34, a former EMT from Eugene, Oregon, soft-spoken, bookish, a hiking enthusiast who kept his past tucked away behind a trail map and a nervous smile. Cal arrived in Breckenridge in late September. According to receipts and gas station footage, his plan was simple: hike for a week, decompress, then head south through Colorado and into Arizona. But Cal was never seen outside of Breckenridge again. His last known movements were logged by a series of security cameras along Main Street, and, later, by a trail cam positioned just beyond Peak 10. The footage shows a man already unraveling. Wide eyes, mud-streaked clothing, twitching fingers. He speaks to no one, but mouths words as he walks. What happened to Cal Morgan in the days prior remains a mystery, but the pieces he left behind tell enough of the story to haunt it. Let's rewind. According to the private blog Cal kept, entries recovered and authenticated by data forensics, his first few days in Breckenridge were uneventful. Normal. He hiked the Boreas Pass Trail, took drone footage near Hoosier Ridge, drank at a tavern called the Split Fur, where an older man told him about the whispers in the pines, and laughed like it was a joke. But Cal didn't laugh. He went looking. By the 5th day, he stopped updating his friends. No more texts, no more trail photos, no check-ins. What we do have is a draft email in his phone, unsent, dated just 2 days before his disappearance. There's something wrong with the people here. I asked too many questions at the library, and now they follow me. I see the same faces, same 5, always 5. Even the kids just stare. I think they've been here a long time. Too long. I'm hearing things in the trees. It sounds like my mom's voice, but she died last winter. I'm going to try and leave tonight. If I don't make it, tell someone about the roots. Please, don't let them plant me. They never found Cal's body, but they found his boot, and they found his knife, wedged deep into the bark of a tree that bled red, thick sap running like veins. The authorities called it a disappearance. Case closed. But the townspeople remember differently. Several accounts gathered through anonymous interviews describe the night Cal tried to escape. One elderly man, referred to in our files only as H, claimed to have seen him running barefoot down Ridge Street around 2 a.m. Clothes shredded, eyes wild, arms covered in symbols that looked carved. Another source, a retired fire warden, reported seeing Cal at the base of the old mining shaft near French Gulch, standing perfectly still, talking to no one. Mouth moving, eyes open, but empty. Here's where the story turns sideways, because the next report came from an RV camper parked off Boreas Pass Road. A couple from Kansas, first-timers, claimed they were woken around 3 a.m. by the sound of someone sobbing, just outside their camper. They looked out and saw a man, mud-caked, skin-torn, whispering something over and over again. They planted me. I was never born. That was the last verified sighting. From here, the accounts become less stable. Hikers have since reported seeing someone in the woods fitting Cal's description, always far away, always watching. Some say he speaks their names before they've even told them. Others say he begs for help, but disappears the moment you blink. And in one deeply disturbing report, a forest ranger's child, age 7, was found standing at the edge of the tree line at sunrise, holding a bundle of torn flannel, humming a lullaby their family swore they'd never taught. When asked why they were out there, the child simply said, "Uncle Cal told me the moon is a mouth, and it eats the ones who listen." So what happened during Cal Morgan's escape attempt? Did he fall prey to exposure, an animal attack? Or was the truth far older, far colder than nature itself? In his notes, Cal described hallucinations. But there were patterns in them, recurring voices, the scent of rotting pine. He mentioned cryptic songs coming from the mine shafts, and a phrase he claimed to hear over and over from unseen mouths. "Your name was borrowed, it must be returned?" Even more disturbing are the markings found on trees along Cal's last known route, symbols burned into the bark, identical to those etched into the journals of Elliot Ramsey from Segment 8. Runes, circles, arrows pointing down into the soil, down into the root. Some theorize Cal had uncovered too much, that he'd wandered too close to the original burial site of the Pack's founders, the ones never fully dead, but never fully alive. Others believe he was chosen, not to die, but to become part of the forest's memory. A man erased, language scraped clean from his throat, eyes offered in silence, left in a liminal state, neither guest nor prisoner, just bound, by earth, by root, by pact. This is what happens when you know too much, when you stray from the marked trail, when you see them watching and look back. In the next segment, we'll descend deeper into the place whispered of in local myth, sealed since 1902, guarded by silence and guilt. The chamber below the mine, where the pact was first made, and where it waits to be renewed. Subscribe to MindFuel now, because this isn't a ghost story. It's a map, and you're already following it. The voices are getting louder, and the next trailhead begins beneath your feet. Next up, where stone remembers blood, and echoes can speak in your voice. A descent into the oldest room Breckenridge forgot to bury, only on MindFuel. There are stories that rot in the corners of history, untouched, unspoken, until someone dares to dig. But some truths were never meant to be uncovered. By the time we reach the final mile of Breckenridge's hidden past, we find ourselves looking at something far older than the town, older than the mines, older, perhaps, than the mountains themselves. A promise made not just between men, but between flesh and something that watches beneath the earth. And in the end, all pacts require payment. Let's return to Elliot Ramsey, the descendant, the inheritor, the man who found bones under his floorboards and journals lined with glyphs etched in a hand not quite human. When we last left him, he was unraveling the truth about what it meant to carry blood from one of the original 5 families. But what he didn't yet understand was that blood wasn't enough. It never had been. You see, the pact, crafted during that fateful winter when miners resorted to unspeakable acts, was not just a means of survival. It was a merging. 5 families bound by desperation, yes, but they forged something beyond human, beyond explainable. The ritual had a demand. Their children would continue it. Their descendants would protect it. But to sustain it, to truly keep the pact alive, they needed new blood, outsider blood. It was never about isolation. It was never about hiding from the world. Breckenridge needed people to come, to visit, to stay a while, to feel safe, because every generation the soil hungered for something fresh, something untainted by the original oath. And once they arrived, the town set its gaze. Outsiders weren't just unlucky. They were chosen, adopted, bound into a bloodline that had already given itself to something older than Scripture. According to Eliot's recovered journal entries, sealed in a chest beneath the root cellar and later authenticated by handwriting experts, he began to experience blackouts around his 6th week in Breckenridge. He'd wake in strange places, covered in dust, fingers smeared with something dark. Sometimes he would find pine needles in his bed, sometimes ash in his mouth. And always, the dreams. A voice like tree bark cracking in firelight, a woman with no eyes whispering instructions through stone, a repeated phrase carved into his memory with each passing night. Choose, one path ends, one becomes root. The final journal entry is the most disturbing. He speaks of being brought, escorted really, to a chamber beneath the church. Not the crypt mentioned earlier. This was deeper. A tunnel, hidden under the altar, sealed behind oak planks and a rusted gate. It smelled like old salt and burned hair. The walls were damp with a moisture that didn't feel like water. There were people waiting there, but not strangers. Family. They called themselves the Bound Circle. All descendants of the founders, but not aging, not the way they should. Faces frozen in time, yet not untouched. Eyes too dark, skin too pale where the veins glowed like roots beneath the surface. One stepped forward and called Eliot by his full name. They asked him if he remembered his grandmother's last words. He didn't, but they reminded him. You carry what we buried, and now it wants to grow. They handed him a small blade and brought forward a girl, a tourist, maybe 19, bound, drugged, someone who had stumbled across the wrong trail or asked the wrong question in the tavern. She was crying, barely awake. They said, choose. One must feed the pact, or you become the offering. In that moment, Eliot understood. This was how it worked. The town doesn't kill outsiders because it hates them. It does it because the pact demands integration. Blood must be merged. The founders' mistake was not that they made a deal. It was that they made a deal with something that wants to become more, to spread, to root itself in people. And every new victim isn't discard. Or they're added. Their memories, their dreams, their flesh, merged into the lineage. The circle had discovered a method, through ritual, through consumption, through soil, that allowed them to maintain the illusion of life. But it was only an illusion. They were no longer human, not entirely. And Eliot Ramsey, he had to make a choice. Become one of them, or join the others buried beneath the snow. We do not know what choice he made. His body was never recovered. But several months later, a man matching his description was seen walking near the remains of the Ramsey cabin. Hair longer, eyes darker, not quite blinking. He was holding a child's hand. The child matched the description of another missing tourist, from Montana, vanished 2 years earlier. When approached, the man simply smiled and said, "We're home." The pact was never broken. It was merely passed along, one bloodline at a time. So, if you ever visit Breckenridge, if you feel eyes watching you from the woods, or hear your name spoken in a voice you recognize but can't place, if you find an old key in your room or a symbol carved into your doorframe, it means they've seen something in you, something they need, and they're offering you the choice. The same one Eliot faced. Join the family, or feed it. Next time on MindFuel, we descend into the ancient chamber beneath the mine. The one older than Breckenridge, older than the families, older than the pact. where words are carved in ash and something waits with 1,000 open mouths. Subscribe now to MindFuel, because the next truth isn't something you'll read. It's something you'll hear, and once you do, it never stops speaking. The truth has roots deeper than bones, deeper than the stones men lay in worship or in warning. And when those roots are disturbed, when the bargain that feeds them is broken, they do not retreat. They awaken, and they rise. In the weeks following Elliot Ramsey's final appearance, there were signs, quiet at first, then impossible to ignore. Birds vanished, not flew away, vanished. One moment, dozens could be seen above the pine line, ravens, hawks, songbirds flitting between frozen branches. The next, stillness. Silence so thick it pressed on the chest like pressure underwater. Locals whispered of sudden nosebleeds. The air felt wrong, thicker, like breathing through cloth soaked in pine resin. The air carried a vibration, low, constant, like the mountains were humming a warning. But none of it compared to what was found beneath the old Lutheran church on Ridge Street. It was Delaney Moore who found it, a former anthropology student, now a seasonal worker, running guided hikes around Breckenridge's lesser-known trails. She had grown curious after hearing conflicting local tales about the bound chamber, a second, deeper crypt that supposedly connected to a pre-colonial tunnel system. Delaney had never believed in ghosts until she found the stones that bled. She descended beneath the altar, where loose floorboards hinted at something hollow below. The air shifted. Not temperature, texture. She would later write, before her final journal entry cut off abruptly, that stepping into the dark stairwell was like stepping into a lung that was still breathing. Dust didn't float. It followed. At the bottom, a chamber, circular, stone, the walls alive with carvings, some Germanic, others native, others completely unidentifiable, and in the center, a basin carved from a single stone. Inside, dark fluid, thick, still but not stagnant. There were 3 figures waiting. She recognized 2 of them, both from town. One ran the antique store. The other had checked her groceries just 2 days before. They weren't surprised to see her. In fact, they smiled. The ritual had already begun. And this time, Elliot was leading it. But Delaney, who had learned too much too quickly and seen what was never meant to be seen, wasn't a witness. She was meant to be the offering. Bound and laid against the stone floor, she stared into the basin as chants began. The liquid trembled as voices rose. It mirrored nothing, no reflection, just movement, as if something was watching from beneath it. And then, she screamed, not from pain, from realization. Her voice cut through the chamber, fracturing the chant. She screamed a name she had read in one of Elliot's recovered journals, Sehna Ura, a name scratched into ancient diagrams, a name that hadn't been spoken aloud in over 150 years. It was never meant to be remembered, and it certainly wasn't meant to be said during the ritual. The moment the name left her mouth, the earth answered. A tremor rolled through the foundation of Breckenridge. Not a quake, a heaving, like something massive, buried deep, had flinched. The walls of the chamber cracked, not horizontally, but vertically, as if being split open from below. Carvings split. The stone basin tipped and shattered, and the fluid inside? It didn't spill, it scattered, vanished in midair like ash caught in reverse wind. Elliot collapsed, eyes wide. Others began seizing, limbs twisting at unnatural angles, bones breaking inward. Delaney ran. She made it just past the altar when the floor behind her collapsed, dragging the entire back of the church into a sinkhole that hadn't been there 10 seconds earlier. And above ground? The town finally began to show its age. The first to notice were the road workers just outside town. a fresh crack stretching nearly 50 feet across the main road, opening with no seismic warning. Then, the foundation of the ranger station buckled. The station had stood for over 70 years. It fell in 2 minutes. Fissures spread through the town like veins. Cellars caved in. Snow slid from rooftops even though no wind moved. At the town's edge, the trees began to lean inward, as if pulled, drawn. And then came the sounds. From the mountains. Whispers at first, indistinct, then clearer, and then identifiable. They were the voices of the missing, voices of the long dead, calling out from the hills one after another in tones that didn't match human mouths. Delaney escaped with a broken shoulder and deep lacerations across her back. She never returned to Colorado. She was interviewed by a regional podcast, The Missing Mile, just once before she vanished herself during a visit to a national park in Oregon. All she said before abruptly ending the interview mid-recording was this: "It's not the pact that held them. It was the feeding. And now, it's starved." The collapse of Breckenridge's pact didn't end the curse. It unmoored it. The roots are now free. And they remember every name, every voice, every drop. Next time on MindFuel, we track the aftershocks of the collapse. Towns in nearby valleys report similar whispers. Signs in the forest shift with no wind, and a body is found, buried under a tree, with no tree nearby. Something is moving across the land. And the pact might have been a prison, not for people, but for something else. Subscribe to MindFuel now, because the ground beneath you might already be listening. The town collapsed, but the story, it did not end. What we bury, if fed long enough, grows teeth, and what we bind, if held too tightly, does not die. It waits. They say the tremor that swallowed half of Ridge Street was the final breath of the Breckenridge Pact, that the roots had been severed, the stone basin shattered, the blood ritual broken. But that's only part of the truth, because when a pact is broken, it doesn't just fall apart, it releases. And in that release came them. In the 12 hours following the underground collapse, emergency responders were called in from Frisco, Leadville, even as far as Buena Vista. They found a town choking on dust and silence. What few residents remained spoke in fractured sentences, eyes darting, hands trembling. One elderly man was found staring at a mirror with no reflection, but none of them mentioned the shadows moving between buildings, the ones that left no footprints in the snow, the ones that didn't blink. Somewhere just outside town, near a closed trailhead known only to locals as the Throat, a woman stumbled out of the forest, bloodied, frostbitten, half-conscious. She wore torn hiking gear and an old silver pendant crusted in something black and flaking. Her name was Delaney Moore, somehow. She had survived, or most of her had. She was found by a snowplow operator around 3:17 a.m., stumbling barefoot along the shoulder of Highway 9. Her eyes were open, but she didn't speak for several minutes. When she did, she said only, "It didn't end down there. It just got out." She was airlifted to a hospital in Denver. Tests showed signs of extreme hypothermia, blunt force trauma, and traces of pine resin inside her lungs, despite no known exposure to smoke or open flame. The next day, her room was found empty. Security footage showed the door never opened, her bed still warm, her pendant left on the windowsill. Scratched into its back in crude letters, "They are walking now." The town was evacuated within 48 hours under the guise of geological instability. A press release blamed unprecedented frost heave and methane shifts. But within the emergency response units, quietly, behind closed doors, a different story was being whispered. Stories of search dogs who refused to approach certain parts of the forest, of rescue workers who heard children calling their names from the treetops, of a body found 20 feet up a pine, twisted like it had grown that way, and of one man, veteran, father of 3, who pulled his own eyes out with his bare hands after a night alone near the mine ruins. He didn't die. He just whispered the same phrase over and over. They're hungry now. These weren't ghosts in the traditional sense. They weren't lost souls seeking resolution. They were bound revenants, twisted by decades, centuries of silence, secrecy, and starvation. They had not moved on because the pact never allowed them to. They were trapped in a cycle of offering and hunger, held in place by bloodlines too scared to set them free and too greedy to let them die. And now, released from the ritual, they were no longer tethered to Breckenridge. They were loose. The first sightings came from Dillon Reservoir. Fishermen hearing wet footsteps on the dock at 2 a.m. One man swore he saw his dead brother walk out of the fog, wearing the same clothes he was buried in, but no face. Then, over in Keystone, a ranger's trail cam caught a figure staring straight into the lens from less than an inch away. The footage was time-stamped at 4:12 a.m. The camera had been triggered 9 seconds earlier, from a motion sensor 30 feet away. And then came the dreams. Locals described voices in their heads that sounded like family, friends, dead lovers, all of them saying the same thing. Come back to the roots, feed the ground, join the blood. Breckenridge may have collapsed, but something ancient had stirred beneath it. Not a being, not in the way we understand, but a need, a force, something that was fed for too long, and now it refuses to starve again. As for Delaney, no one has seen her since. But every few months, hikers claim to spot a woman just beyond the tree line, standing still, watching, always barefoot, always alone, and always leaving behind a small pendant etched with the symbol of the bound circle, the very emblem etched into the bones found under her inherited cabin. Some say the pact was about immortality. Others say it was about survival. But it was never really about either. It was about holding something down, something we should have never woken. And now that it's free, it's remembering. Every name, every offering, every promise broken. You've just experienced segment 12 of Colorado's Breckenridge Pact. A ghost town bound by blood. But the story doesn't end here, because something is moving. East, south, spreading. And in our final chapter, we follow a new set of missing person reports that suggest the pact didn't collapse. It migrated. Subscribe to MindFuel, because next time, the whispers won't be from the mountains. They'll be in your woods. She made it to the edge of the forest, and for a moment, the curse of Breckenridge felt like a story she could leave behind. But legends don't die. They wait. And some things don't follow you to the edge of town. They follow you home. In Volume 4, the world begins to listen. But not everyone wants the truth uncovered.